A wounded Marine's journey. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the crowded shopping center as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez slowly made his way through the bustling corridors. His right leg, still recovering from shrapnel wounds sustained during his third deployment in Afghanistan, moved with a noticeable limp that he tried desperately to hide. The prosthetic device attached to his left arm remained concealed beneath his long-sleeved civilian shirt, but the slight awkwardness in his movements betrayed the challenges he faced daily. Marcus had been home for 8 months now, discharged from Walter Reed Medical Center after extensive rehabilitation. The physical wounds were healing, but the invisible scars ran deeper than any surgeon could reach. Today was supposed to be a simple errand run, picking up a gift for his younger sister's graduation. He had chosen this particular shopping center because it was close to his apartment and usually not too crowded during weekday afternoons. As he approached the electronics store, a group of teenagers noticed his uneven gait. Their whispered comments and poorly concealed laughter cut through the ambient noise of the shopping center like knives. "Look at that guy," one of them snickered. "What's wrong with his walk?" Another added with cruel indifference, "Probably some drunk trying to act normal." Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger, but he continued walking, his military training kicking in to maintain composure under fire, even if this fire came from ignorant civilians rather than enemy combatants. He had faced Taliban fighters, improvised explosive devices, and mortar attacks, yet somehow the casual cruelty of these young people struck him harder than any battlefield wound. The store was busy with the usual mix of customers browsing the latest gadgets and electronics. Marcus found himself standing in line behind a well-dressed businessman who kept checking his expensive watch and sighing loudly about the wait. When Marcus accidentally bumped into him slightly while adjusting his stance to relieve pressure on his injured leg, the man turned around with obvious annoyance. "Watch where you're going!" the businessman snapped, looking Marcus up and down with undisguised disdain. "Some people have important places to be." His tone carried the assumption that Marcus, dressed in simple jeans and a casual shirt, was somehow less worthy of respect or consideration. Marcus apologized quietly, but the businessman continued his verbal assault. "You military types think you own the place when you come back. Maybe if you learned some basic coordination, you wouldn't be bumping into people trying to conduct real business." The comment was loud enough for other customers to hear, and several turned to look at the unfolding confrontation. What the businessman didn't know was that Marcus had served as a reconnaissance marine, specializing in dangerous missions behind enemy lines. He had saved countless lives during his deployments and had been awarded the Purple Heart, along with several commendations for valor under fire. The coordination he criticized had once allowed Marcus to navigate treacherous mountain terrain while carrying wounded comrades to safety. A young mother with 2 small children in tow noticed the commotion and decided to add her own commentary. "Honestly, some people have no consideration for families trying to shop peacefully," she said, shooting disapproving glances toward Marcus. Her children stared openly at his slight limp, and she made no effort to redirect their attention or teach them about respect for others. The cashier, a college-aged woman, seemed more interested in her phone than in providing decent customer service. When Marcus finally reached the counter, she barely looked up as she processed his purchase. "Cash or card?" she asked with obvious boredom, making no effort to hide her impatience when Marcus took a moment to retrieve his wallet with his prosthetic hand, a movement that required more concentration and time than it once did. As Marcus completed his transaction, a security guard approached him. The guard had been watching the various interactions and had apparently decided that Marcus, rather than the people treating him poorly, was the potential problem. "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to move along," the guard said with authority that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "You're causing a disturbance, and we've had complaints." The irony was not lost on Marcus. He had spent years protecting the very freedoms that allowed these people to treat him with such disrespect. He had volunteered to serve his country, knowing full well the risks involved, and had paid a significant physical price for that service. Yet here he was, being treated like a second-class citizen in the very country he had fought to defend. Marcus gathered his purchase and began walking toward the exit, his limp slightly more pronounced now due to the stress and tension of the encounters. The crowd seemed to part around him, but not out of respect, rather out of the same kind of avoidance one might show toward something unpleasant or unwanted. As he made his way through the main corridor of the shopping center, more incidents unfolded. A group of middle-aged women chatting near a coffee shop fell silent as he passed, then resumed their conversation in hushed tones punctuated by disapproving glances in his direction. An elderly man sitting on a bench actually moved to a different seat, as if Marcus's presence was somehow threatening or uncomfortable. The weight of these accumulated slights pressed down on Marcus like a physical burden. Each dismissive look, every whispered comment, and all the casual cruelty he had experienced during this simple shopping trip served as painful reminders of how disconnected he felt from the civilian world he had fought to protect. The brotherhood of the Marines, the clear sense of purpose, and the mutual respect among service members seemed like memories from another lifetime. Near the center of the shopping complex, Marcus paused to rest for a moment, leaning against a decorative pillar while he gathered his strength for the walk back to his car. His leg was aching more than usual, partly from the physical exertion, but mostly from the emotional stress of the afternoon's experiences. He closed his eyes briefly, trying to center himself and find the inner strength that had carried him through much more dangerous situations. What Marcus didn't notice was that his entire journey through the shopping center had been observed by a group of men who recognized exactly what they were witnessing. These observers had military bearing that was unmistakable to those who knew what to look for, and they had watched with growing anger and disgust as one of their brother warriors was subjected to treatment that no service member should ever have to endure. The SEALs' response. Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson and his team of 5 Navy SEALs had been conducting a routine security assessment of the shopping center as part of their civilian contract work between deployments. What started as a mundane assignment quickly transformed into something much more personal when they witnessed the treatment being directed toward the wounded Marine. Thompson, a 15-year veteran with multiple combat deployments, felt his blood pressure rising as he watched civilians treat a wounded warrior with such callous disregard. Through his tactical observation training, he had identified Marcus as military from the moment he entered their field of view. The bearing, the way he carried himself despite his obvious injuries, and the quiet dignity with which he endured the mistreatment were all telltale signs of a seasoned service member. Chief Petty Officer Mike Chen, Thompson's second-in-command, spoke quietly into his team's discreet communication system. "Skipper, we've got a wounded Marine taking abuse from these civilians. This is not sitting right with any of us." The other SEALs, Petty Officers Rodriguez, Williams, Jackson, and Murphy, all nodded their agreement as they maintained their positions throughout the shopping center. Thompson made a decision that would soon change the entire atmosphere of the shopping complex. "Gentlemen, we're going to conduct an impromptu public education session. These people need to understand exactly what they're dealing with, and our Marine brother deserves better than this treatment." The team began moving into position with the precision and coordination that had made them effective in countless overseas operations. The first target of their intervention was the group of teenagers who had initially mocked Marcus's limp. Petty Officer Williams, despite his intimidating physical presence, approached them with a calm but unmistakably serious demeanor. "Excuse me," he said to the group, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I need to have a brief conversation with you about the gentleman you were commenting on earlier." The teenagers, Suddenly faced with a man whose military bearing and obvious physical conditioning commanded immediate attention, found their earlier bravado quickly evaporating. Williams continued in a tone that was educational rather than threatening, but left no doubt about the gravity of his words. "That man you were laughing at is a United States Marine who was wounded serving his country. The limp you found amusing is the result of injuries sustained while protecting your freedom to stand here and make ignorant comments." As the teenagers' faces transformed from smugness to shame, Williams pressed on with his lesson. Every step he takes probably involves some level of pain, yet he continues to carry himself with dignity and honor. You might want to consider whether your behavior reflects the kind of citizens that brave men and women have sacrificed to protect. The group stood in stunned silence, realizing for the first time the true nature of their cruelty. Meanwhile, Chief Chen had positioned himself near the businessman who had verbally assaulted Marcus at the electronics store. As the man emerged from completing his purchase, Chen intercepted him with professional courtesy that somehow felt more intimidating than any direct threat. "Sir, I believe you had an interaction with a Marine earlier that didn't reflect well on either of you." The businessman, initially defensive, found himself face-to-face with a man whose quiet confidence and obvious military background made arguments seem futile. Chen explained, "That gentleman you insulted has probably seen more real business in a single deployment than you'll encounter in a lifetime of corporate dealings. He's conducted operations where coordination meant the difference between life and death for American service members." "The man you criticize for lack of coordination," Chen continued, "once carried wounded comrades across hostile territory under enemy fire. His apparent clumsiness is actually the result of injuries sustained while serving his country with distinction. Perhaps you might want to reconsider your definition of what constitutes real business and important places to be." Petty Officer Rodriguez had taken responsibility for addressing the young mother who had complained about Marcus's consideration for families. His approach was particularly pointed, as he had 2 young children of his own back home. "Ma'am, I noticed you felt that Marine was inconsiderate toward your family. I'd like you to consider that he and others like him have spent years away from their families, facing dangers most people can't imagine, specifically to ensure that families like yours can shop safely in places like this." The woman's defensive posture began to crumble as Rodriguez continued. "Your children were staring at his injuries with curiosity, which is natural for kids. But instead of using that as a teaching moment about respect and sacrifice, you chose to model disrespect for someone who has paid a significant price for your family's security. What lesson do you think your children learned today?" Petty Officer Jackson had made his way to the security guard who had demanded that Marcus leave the area. Jackson's approach was direct and professionally devastating. "I understand you asked a wounded Marine to move along because he was causing a disturbance. I'd like to know what specific actions he took that constituted disturbing the peace." When the security guard stammered about complaints and potential problems, Jackson calmly explained the actual situation. "The only disturbance I observed was created by civilians who chose to treat a wounded veteran with disrespect and contempt. The Marine in question conducted himself with exemplary self-control under circumstances that would have justified a much stronger response." Jackson continued, "This man has probably provided security for American personnel in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He understands real security threats, and I guarantee you he poses less of a problem than the people who were actually creating the disturbance through their behavior." Petty Officer Murphy had positioned himself near the coffee shop, where the group of middle-aged women had whispered and pointed at Marcus. His intervention was subtle but effective. He simply approached their table and politely introduced himself as an active-duty Navy SEAL, then asked if they had noticed the wounded Marine who had passed by their table. When they confirmed that they had, Murphy explained, "That gentleman has served multiple combat deployments in defense of American interests. The injuries that you may have noticed are the result of his service to our country." I wanted to make sure you understood the true nature of what you witnessed, because I believe most Americans would want to show appropriate respect for someone who has sacrificed so much." The women's expressions shifted from defensive to deeply embarrassed as Murphy continued. "These men and women return home to communities they've helped protect, and they deserve our support and understanding, not our judgment or avoidance. They've earned the right to live their civilian lives with dignity and respect." Lieutenant Commander Thompson had saved the most important intervention for himself, a direct approach to Marcus. The SEAL officer caught up with the Marine as he was preparing to leave the shopping center. "Excuse me, Marine," Thompson said, using the respectful address that immediately identified him as a fellow service member. Marcus turned, and Thompson could see in his eyes the accumulated weight of the afternoon's experiences. "Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson, Navy SEALs," Thompson introduced himself with a crisp salute that Marcus automatically returned despite being in civilian clothes. "My team and I witnessed the treatment you received here today, and we want you to know that it was completely unacceptable." Thompson continued, "We've taken the liberty of having educational conversations with the individuals involved, not as threats or intimidation, but as fellow Americans helping other Americans understand what they were really dealing with. You served with honor, you were wounded in service to our country, and you deserve better than what happened here today." The transformation and redemption. The impact of the SEALs' intervention rippled through the shopping center like waves spreading across still water. As word spread about the true identity and service record of the man they had treated so poorly, a remarkable transformation began to take place among the civilians who had participated in or witnessed the earlier incidents. The teenagers who had initially mocked Marcus's limp found themselves struggling with feelings they had never experienced before. The oldest of the group, a 17-year-old named Tyler, approached Petty Officer Williams after the SEAL's explanation. "Sir, is there anything we can do to make this right?" Tyler asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "We didn't know, but that's not really an excuse, is it?" Williams recognized genuine remorse when he saw it and decided to turn the moment into a positive learning experience. "The best thing you can do is remember this feeling and let it guide your behavior in the future. Every person you encounter has a story you don't know. Kindness costs nothing, but cruelty can devastate someone who's already carrying burdens you can't see." Tyler and his friends spent the next hour researching military service and veterans issues on their phones, sharing articles and statistics about wounded warriors returning home. They had gone from mockery to genuine interest in understanding the sacrifices made by service members. Tyler later admitted to his friends that he had never really thought about what military service actually meant beyond what he saw in movies and video games. The businessman who had insulted Marcus experienced perhaps the most dramatic change in perspective. After Chief Chen's intervention, the man sat in his luxury sedan in the parking lot for nearly 30 minutes, processing what he had learned. His name was David Harrison, and he was a successful financial consultant who had built his career on reading people and situations accurately. Yet he had completely misjudged the wounded Marine. Harrison realized that his definition of success and importance had been embarrassingly narrow. Here was a man who had volunteered to serve his country, had been wounded in that service, and continued to carry himself with dignity despite ongoing challenges. Meanwhile, Harrison had been worried about minor delays in his comfortable, secure civilian life, security that men like Marcus had helped provide. The next day, Harrison began researching veterans organizations and wounded warrior support groups. Within a week, he had made substantial financial contributions to 3 different charities supporting wounded veterans. More importantly, he began volunteering his financial expertise to help veterans navigate the complexities of disability benefits and financial planning during their transitions to civilian life. The young mother, Sarah Chen, experienced her own moment of reckoning when she explained to her children what Petty Officer Rodriguez had taught her. Her 6-year-old son, Tommy, listened carefully as she described how some people serve in the military to protect others, sometimes getting hurt while doing so. Tommy asked the question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Mommy, if that man was protecting us, why were you mean to him?" Sarah found herself without a good answer, and she realized that her children had indeed learned a lesson that day, just not the one she had intended to teach through her example. Sarah began incorporating lessons about respect, service, and gratitude into her daily conversations with her children. She started reading them books about military service and community helpers, helping them understand that many people make sacrifices to keep communities safe and free. The family began participating in local veterans events and supporting military families in their community. The security guard, whose name was Robert Martinez, faced professional consequences for his poor judgment in targeting Marcus rather than addressing the actual sources of disturbance. However, the shopping center management decided to use the incident as a learning opportunity rather than simply punitive action. Martinez underwent additional training on recognizing and supporting customers with disabilities, including veterans dealing with service-connected injuries. He also began volunteering with local veteran organizations, where he learned about the challenges faced by returning service members. His experience with Marcus became a turning point that transformed him from someone who made assumptions to someone who actively supported veterans in his community. The cashier who had shown indifference toward Marcus received feedback from her supervisor about customer service and respect for all shoppers. However, the real change came when she learned about Marcus's service record and realized how her behavior had contributed to his negative experience. She began making an effort to treat all customers with genuine courtesy and respect, understanding that everyone she encountered might be dealing with challenges she couldn't see. Her improved customer service became noticeable to both colleagues and customers, and she eventually received recognition for her positive attitude and helpful approach. The elderly man who had moved seats to avoid sitting near Marcus experienced profound regret when he learned the truth about the situation. As a Korean War veteran himself, he understood better than most what military service meant and what wounded veterans endured. His avoidance had been based on assumptions rather than recognition of a fellow veteran. This realization prompted him to become more active in local veterans organizations, where he began sharing his own service stories and connecting with younger veterans dealing with contemporary challenges. He developed friendships with several Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, finding common ground across generational differences in military experience. The group of middle-aged women from the coffee shop underwent their own transformation after Petty Officer Murphy's respectful but pointed education. They had been operating under social assumptions and prejudices they hadn't even realized they held. Learning about Marcus's service and sacrifice forced them to examine their own biases and behaviors. They began organizing support activities for local military families, including care packages for deployed service members and assistance for families dealing with deployment challenges. Their coffee shop conversations shifted from idle gossip to meaningful discussions about community service and supporting local heroes. Marcus himself experienced the most profound change of all. Lieutenant Commander Thompson's intervention and the subsequent support from the SEAL team reminded him that he was not alone and that his service was valued and respected by those who mattered most, his fellow warriors. The connection with the SEAL team led to Marcus becoming involved with veteran support networks that he hadn't known existed. He began attending group therapy sessions specifically for combat veterans, where he found others who understood both his visible and invisible wounds. Thompson and his team made sure that Marcus received information about additional resources available to him, including advanced medical care, vocational rehabilitation, and peer support programs. They also invited him to participate in veteran networking events where his military skills and experience could be valued and utilized. 6 months later, Marcus had found employment with a security consulting firm that specifically sought to hire veterans with his background and experience. His military training, combat experience, and understanding of threat assessment made him invaluable in his new civilian career. The shopping center itself implemented new policies and training programs focused on customer service excellence and respect for all patrons, including specific education about recognizing and supporting veterans and people with disabilities. The incident with Marcus became a case study used in training sessions for all employees. The management also began hosting quarterly events honoring local veterans and first responders, creating opportunities for the community to show appreciation for those who serve. These events became popular community gatherings that brought together civilians and service members in positive, supportive environments. The ripple effects of that single afternoon continued to spread throughout the community for years to come. Children who learned about respect and service grew up with deeper appreciation for military sacrifice. Adults who confronted their own biases became more compassionate and supportive community members. Marcus's story became a powerful reminder that wounded warriors don't stop serving when they return home. They continue to teach important lessons about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of strength. His dignity in the face of ignorance and disrespect demonstrated the values that make military service so honorable. The intervention by the SEAL team showed how military brotherhood extends beyond active duty and how veterans can support each other in civilian life. Their professional, educational approach transformed potential confrontation into genuine learning and positive change for everyone involved. Most importantly, the entire experience demonstrated that communities can learn, grow, and become better places for all citizens when people are willing to examine their assumptions, acknowledge their mistakes, and commit to treating all members of society with dignity and respect.